Hey listeners, this is Chris here. Just a warning off the top. We had some major network issues recording this episode, so we did our best of starts and stops, and through the magic of editing and my skill set as a human being, hopefully I have Frankensteined this monster, and it's enjoyable. So again, I just wanted to warn you up front, it should be good, but just because I am a wannabe perfectionist, this is more for me to feel better about myself. So, enjoy.
The Continental Op, Philip Marlowe, Sam Spade, Mike Hammer. These are but a few of the dozens and dozens of heroes and anti-heroes that populated the world of hard-boiled fiction, which came to prominence in America during the mid-1920s and enjoyed a long-running literary heyday throughout the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Popularized by authors such as Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, and Mickey Spillane, hard-boiled fiction, often considered an offshoot or spiritual cousin to the similar genre of noir fiction, typically concerns tough, hard-drinking, womanizing, cynical detectives or private investigators, tasked with solving murder mysteries that put them in direct conflict not only with organized crime, but with often equally corrupt political and law enforcement agencies. While it's not fair to say every hard-boiled fiction story or protagonist is exactly the same, it's certainly true many were similar enough that the genre quickly became known for easy-to-identify tropes and cliches, which became doubly true when the already popular literary genre also became a cinematic phenomenon during the 40s and 50s, thanks to films like 1941's The Maltese Falcon, 1944's Double Indemnity, 1946's The Big Sleep, and 1955's Kiss Me Deadly. While hard-boiled fiction certainly never entirely vanished from bookshelves or movie screens, its pervasiveness undeniably slowed down after the 50s, at least partly because those same tropes that had come to define the genre now often seemed like a sort of self-parody, even when indulged in unironically. Still, authors like Max Allan Collins, Walter Mosley, and Robert B. Parker kept the literary hard-boiled torch burning for those fans who still enjoyed these booze, bullet, and blood-soaked tales, reminders of a more rough-and-tumble time. Today, the literary imprint Hard Case Crime, founded in 2004, continues to successfully publish both reprints of classic hard-boiled novels and new novels written in the classic hard-boiled style, all adorned with beautiful, hand-painted covers, reminiscent of the sexy and violent artwork that would typically adorn the original hard-boiled novels of the earlier era. Meanwhile, while noir-infused hard-boiled films would never again hit multiplexes at the rate they did during the genre's heyday, later decades still saw periodic returns to the genre's trappings, often produced as tributes or throwbacks, such as Roman Polanski's Chinatown and Carl Franklin's Devil in a Blue Dress, genre mashups like Ridley Scott's Blade Runner and Rian Johnson's Brick, or pastiche parodies such as Carl Reiner's Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid and the Coen brothers' The Big Lebowski. And yet, while the hard-boiled detective mystery has remained a regular fixture in American pop culture throughout the decades, certain elements of the genre have remained more or less frustratingly set in stone, including the genre's undeniably unequal representation of male and female characters. While the vast majority of the sour but ultimately heroic at heart protagonists of these tales are men, the women are typically relegated to sexpot roles, one-night-stand conquests, pining secretaries and assistants, and scheming femme fatale seductresses and murderous vixens. On screen, many of these characters allowed a number of actresses to delightfully dive into memorable roles, but there's still no denying the genre has lacked a greater number of front-and-center protagonist roles for women, to the level where hard-boiled fiction tales that do focus on a female detective are often seen more as a fun novelty or a welcome rarity, but not a regular fixture. Maybe that might have changed if the early 90s attempt to adapt one of the literary world's truly successful female-led hard-boiled series had actually taken off with audiences. But, alas, despite landing one of the most successful actresses of the previous decade, it was not to be. But why? The year is 1991, and Hollywood Pictures and Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures, then Buena Vista Pictures, are ready to launch the next big hard-boiled detective franchise with V.I. Warshawski, V.I. Warshawski. welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. I'm Trev.
And I'm C.H. Sorgiovanni.
CH, what does that stand for?
Well, crackhead, cannibal holocaust, and most importantly, co-host.
All right. Well, as we went through that little comedy routine there, Chris, I bet all the Warshawski heads out there were just going crazy because they obviously knew what we were referencing. And that is, this episode is the 4th episode of our 2nd annual Summer Surprise. And it's probably a good thing this was a summer surprise because this is not a movie I think we were ever in any rush to get to or even kind of remembered was on our list. And I think that's something we will talk about with this. And that is 1991's V.I. Warshawski. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this interestingly named movie?
Yeah, for sure. It is directed by Jeff Canoe, most famously, for directing Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah.
It is written by Edward Taylor, David Aaron Cohen, and Nick Teal. 3 guys writing a female-driven narrative born from a female writer. Mm-hmm. This is, like I just said, based off the novel series of the same name by Sara Paretsky. She actually has written 21 books of this series. The newest one coming out this year, 2022, called Overboard.
It's still going.
Still going. The film
the movie
is actually
series not still going.
No. But the books, the movie is based off 2 of the book series: Indemnity Only, Deadlock, and a little from the 3rd one, Killing Orders. Mm-hmm. The budget of the film is $24 million, and worldwide, Trev, get a load of this, it made $11 million. Yeah.
Yep.
So why are we discussing? Well, mostly that.
Yeah, exactly. And when you don't even make half your budget, obviously that's not a great sign. But no. I think there's an even more interesting conversation here because there's not as much about this movie as there is online about a lot of the other films we've covered. So I'm guessing you, like I, were probably looking at some of that material going, geez, what are we going to talk about in our preamble? Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, this is a movie. So first of all, I think when we were first coming up with the list, this is one that I somehow remembered, but you had never even heard of this, right?
No.
Yeah, this is definitely kind of a movie that time has forgotten to a certain degree. Although, as we just said, the book series still going strong, obviously still doing well. So there's obviously fans of this character out there, and I'm guessing they all know about this movie. But that might be kind of it, right?
Yeah.
But I guess what I wanted to talk about with this movie then, obviously we can talk about the leading lady, which is an important part of this, and as you said, maybe talk a little bit more about the decision of who they kind of put in charge of handling this adaptation. Mm-hmm. But I was kind of mostly baffled by this movie in terms of just it existing as a 1991 film, because whenever you think of a movie that's the 90s or 91, you're thinking that that's a movie that was put in development still during the 80s, right? It's kind of like a holdover of the 80s a little bit. Mm-hmm. And this is based on a series of books about the character of V.I. Warshawski, and I guess we should just start saying this now. Well, first of all, we should also first clarify we're probably going to mispronounce that name a lot.
Yeah.
But we don't feel bad about it because that's a running joke in the movie, anyways.
I've actually mispronounced it. I think. Every episode of Summer Surprise saying what the next movie we're going to talk about. So apologies.
Well, and as a Canadian, you probably pronounce V.I. differently even. I don't even know how you say that. So
I say oui, Warshawski.
V.I. Warshawski. So V.I. Warshawski. So it's a female private eye series. Very much in the vein of the old Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Mickey Spillane, kind of hard-boiled PI, but obviously the twist being the private eye is a woman. Mm-hmm. And so what I wanted to point is that's really interesting to me that they tried to start a franchise of it as a cinematic thing at this point in the game, late 80s, early 90s, because that made me go to Google and I looked up 80s detective movies, and there wasn't really many. This kind of genre was really already a thing of the past by the time they made this movie. So when you got into this, finally saw what it was, were you kind of with me and thinking, wow, that was kind of a bold thought in the first place that they might be able to start a franchise with this?
Yeah, like you're saying, there's not a lot in the 80s, right? I was even thinking back to the detective movies that I like, and the first thing that came to my mind was David Fincher. So I'm thinking late 90s, early 2000s, this resurgence, hell, LA Confidential comes out in 1997, right? That's not, David Fincher, but I'm just saying it's one of it felt like the late 90s was when it was starting to ramp up again, versus here. So yeah, ballsy to say the least. Obviously it didn't work out for them. And maybe that's the reason. Actually, maybe that's the reason we didn't see more detective movies in the 80s.
Yeah, it
Especially
could be, 'cause, like,
or sorry, in the 90s. What am I saying? In the 80s?
well, but I think both works, like late
Okay.
80s, early 90s. Yeah, this kind of movie in particular, it's like this noir PI thing. You know, obviously, I think most people would associate that with like the 40s and 50s. That's obviously the height of it. And then every time they come back, you know, you look at something like The Long Goodbye, which is like the 1970s film with Elliot Gould. Like whenever like people kind of bring back the noir, it always does feel like it's meant to be like a tribute to those old kind of movies.
Totally.
Right? And they're typically just like standalones. They're like little like they're almost novelty items, you know?
Kind of like Ryan Johnson's filmography in a weird way. You know, like Brothers Bloom and Brick and
That's-
to,
yeah,
a
great example.
little bit like Knives Out as well, right? It's
And Brick is like a perfect example, right? Because Brick is like, well, let's do that, but the gimmick is, so there's always got to be a gimmick now, right? So Brick is like, well, let's do like a 50s hard-boiled PI story, but they're all teenagers.
Yeah.
You know, and like, so that's always the thing. It's always kind of coming up with like the twist. And I guess the twist with Vi Warshawski is that she's a woman. So the character, because, you know, so I should say first, I'm guessing I've probably seen more film noir and this, you know, kind of hard-boiled detective movies than you have. And it is a genre I really like. It tends to be a very misogynistic genre, which is not why I like it, but it's part of it's part of like it is of its time, right? Like you watch them and you kind of you cringe at like a lot of the treatment of women and minority characters, and there, you know, sometimes I hate to say this, but there's kind of a somewhat of a weird comedic value to that, to see like how backwards, you know, things were at the time. But I'm guessing that was a big element for Sara Paretsky, was to try and reclaim that a little bit and create this, like, you know, in most of those books, the woman would usually be the secretary of the PI, you know, and not the PI herself. And I know that kind of feeds into a little bit of the backstory of this movie and how Sara Paretsky felt about it.
Well, Trev, in the research, I came across an article that I sent off to you, From Chicago to Hollywood: The Metamorphosis of V.I. Warshawski by Nicole DeCure. V.I. Warshawski was made in 1991 by Jeff Canoe. The credits acknowledge the film to be based on the V.I. Warshawski novels by Sara Paretsky, featuring a Chicago female private eye. The series, as of the time of writing, comprises 9 books and a number of short stories. Sara Paretsky, one of the first writers to tackle this new subgenre of hard-boiled fiction, is considered one of the best, if not the best writer of the new wave of women writers writing about women as private eyes. She is certainly one of the most articulately feminist and political.
Yeah, she's an interesting bibliography. I was looking at, I don't know if you know, she's only written 2 non-V.I. Warshawski novels. Like she created this character right off the bat and ran with it. And it's like I said, it's been very, very successful. But yeah, so if it's not that this movie was made to try and cash in on what was a popular genre at the time, then that obviously begs the question, well, what were they going for, right? Like, why did... maybe someone got a hair up their butt to say like, oh, we want to make kind of a fun throwback to those kind of movies we like. But I do think probably the key element of this, and it's probably worth talking about, is when you have a bankable star. You know, that's the thing about this movie, and this is what I always remember about this movie from when I was a kid. I think the only reason this even stuck with me was because as we have covered it many times on this podcast, as you will never let me forget, I'm a little older than you, and
only by a few decades.
And I remember growing up in the era when Kathleen Turner was a huge star.
Right.
And this is interesting because you and I like to talk about this idea of how certain stars last for quite a long time. Certain stars are like immortal. You know, there's the Marilyn Monroes and the James Deans and the John Waynes of the world. And then there are certain stars who have like flame out very quick. And then there's certain stars who, this is the one I always find very interesting, the stars who have a really kind of substantial big run and then kind of, I don't want to say go off a cliff, but just their career kind of, you know, sinks a little bit, right? We're going to talk about what that is with her, but it's very, today I think, for, you know, younger listeners or for people who you know, don't pay as much attention to Hollywood history as maybe we are or as we do, it's easy to forget that Kathleen Turner did kind of dominate the 80s. Yeah. And so when you look at like her being given this like lead role for V.I. Warshawski in 91, that's obviously still a little bit of a holdover of them saying, oh, well, she was so big in the 80s, it's about time she had her own franchise. You know, her franchise character, a title character. So that's what I think probably led to this more than, wow, people like love hard-boiled detective story in the 90s, because that's definitely not it. You know, I think it's more that they saw an opportunity to have a star-driven franchise. So do you want to talk a little bit about Kathleen Turner? I mean, or just talk about some of those films that like, justify this, I think.
You are going to be more able to speak towards her career than I am. Honestly, I don't have much knowledge of her other than
Jessica Rabbit.
Jessica Rabbit. And in the TV show Friends as Chandler's dad/mom. So that's really it. Like, it sounds so shitty that I don't really know much about her career, but and as you like to point out for me and not let me forget, that I refuse to watch anything before 1990.
You refuse to acknowledge that movies existed before 1990.
Correct.
Except for Star Wars. You think Star Wars was the first movie.
Yes, but I also saw those movies in the 90s, so that's how that
right.
works.
You saw special editions. That's right. These brand new movies are so good.
I especially like this big Jabba the Hutt.
I can't believe they got the guy who does Joker's voice to come in and play Luke Skywalker. So Kathleen Turner definitely does have an interesting career in that she is one of those actors, and I always find this like a really kind of a fun story anytime this happens too, where they became a megastar with their first movie, right off the bat. So if you kind of go back and track her career, she did some stage work first. I believe she was on like a soap opera for a little bit, but her first movie role was the lead or one of the co-leads with William Hurt in 1981's Body Heat, which was itself actually it's interesting because we were just talking about how like detective stories weren't big in the 80s in this kind of film noir genre, but the 81 film Body Heat, written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan, was a throwback. It was like a neo-noir erotic thriller. And that's the thing, it was like a very, very erotic, very sexy movie. And she was like a young, up-and-coming ingenue that he found and put into the lead role. And that movie blew up. Like, that movie was a very big deal that year. And it instantly not only made her a star, but it instantly made her a certain kind of star. She right away became like a big spot, And that's been kind of the blessing and the curse of her for a long time. I actually found an interview with her she was interviewed by The Guardian in 2018. And I just wanted to read this bit where she says, "Body Heat was a blessing because I went straight to being a leading actor. And I didn't have to suffer any of this predatory male behavior like many young actresses. It doesn't frustrate me that nearly 4 decades after that film, I'm still referred to as a sexual icon. I got over that a long time ago." So in 2018, looking back on it, she's kind of saying like, first of all, she acknowledges how lucky she was to just become a star with her first movie. She's more at peace now with the idea of being a sexual icon. I know for a fact that from what I've heard about her and what I've read, that's not always the case. Like right after Body Heat, she was smart enough to realize I don't want to just always be the sex bot. Maybe she knew how Hollywood worked. Maybe she knew that you can only ride that for so long. So right away, she tried to do some different things. Her next movie was The Man with Two Brains, a Steve Martin comedy. But then her third movie was also a huge hit. And Chris, I'm guessing you've at least kind of heard of these, if not seen them.
Yes,
and that was
of
Romancing the Stone. Yeah, Romancing the Stone. And then also goes on to do Jewel of the Nile, which are two romantic comedies from Robert Zemeckis starring her and Michael Douglas. Just recently kind of loosely, more or less remade as The Lost City, right? Same basic idea. She's like a romance novelist who ends up kind of getting embroiled in adventures very much like the books she's writing, with Michael Douglas, who's this more adventurer kind of character. And they end up, in these like jungle adventures. Both of those movies are very big as well, especially Romancing the Stone. That's why they right away greenlight like a sequel. She is a supporting player in Prizzi's Honor, and I believe she gets an Oscar nomination for that. I think she wins a Golden Globe for it. She gets another Oscar nomination for 1986's comedy Peggy Sue Got Married. As we said, 1988, she voices Jessica Rabbit super iconically in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And then in 1989, she reteams with Michael Douglas for The War of the Roses, which is a really dark comedy about this this married couple who like hate each other and end up trying to kill each other. Chris, I just want to read. This is keep in mind this is a 1989 movie. It cost $26 million to make, and it made $160 million.
Wow.
Can you imagine today? Even think about today. A singular non-franchise film, a dark comedy about a married couple trying to kill each other, making $160 million. Like that's how big Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner were in 1989.
Doesn't somebody boil or microwave a pet in that movie?
I think you're thinking of Fatal Attraction. I believe.
I am thinking of Fatal Attraction, and I have seen that movie.
Yeah. So
Okay.
those are just, I just want to say, those are just a few of the movies I wanted to mention, just to kind of make the point. Obviously, there's more, but that was just to make the point that she did dominate the 80s.
Well, this movie obviously came at a great time in her career, right? So, like, we're 10 years into her really dominating, as you said. And, you know, at this point, she is that icon status. And the character of V.I. Warshawski appealed to her in particular because it was built around a no-nonsense, take no shit, I don't need no man, strong female character. And at this point in Kathleen Turner's career, a decade in, that is who she is. You know, you can't walk all over Kathleen Turner. So she, you know, was obviously drawn to this film and this property. The only weird part about it is, as we said, this was directed by Jeff Canoe, who was famous for comedies at this point. And the novels in particular are written as serious mysteries. So we'll get to what we think about the movie later, of course, but there's definitely an issue from inception to production. And I think Kathleen Turner, you know, she fought her best to keep the integrity of the character alive. That's well documented. She made sure certain parts of the script stayed intact, and she was she didn't care about raising her own opinion on the movie. So yeah, there's pieces of the original character going into this, but we'll get to that, I guess, in a little bit here.
Yeah, and in fact, Kathleen Turner was kind of already known for that, as you were just alluding to, with like Jewel of the Nile, the sequel to Romancing the Stone. She was like it's kind of infamous that she was really upset with the script, the first script that came through, and she really put her foot down and fought for, you know, script rewrites, wasn't going to make that movie unless they got the script right. And from what I could see, Chris, I guess you saw kind of the same thing. Reading between the lines of some of what we did find in the making of this movie, it kind of sounds like they really kind of blocked Sara Paretsky from being involved, essentially. Like she would have liked to have played a bigger part in the writing. So Kathleen Turner really did have to kind of step up and take on, like, you know, the caretaker role to say, like, no, I want to make a movie of Sara Paretsky's novels, so I will be the one to fight to retain some of that material, even though some of the filmmakers here seemed less interested in the, you know, the source material.
Well, on the subject of both of them fighting for the script, this is going back to the article that I read from Nicole Decure. Both Miss Turner and I wish that the script had been stronger and less slapsticky. However, the movie brought pleasure to millions of viewers. No, it didn't. Nobody saw it. And it had this major redeeming feature. It was one of the few feature films to have an action figure who is a female and who resolves her own problems without needing to sacrifice all for love in the end.
Yeah, in that sense, for like whatever we might think about how the movie turned out, and obviously it wasn't a huge success, but for those V.I. Warshawski fans who really wanted it to be like somewhat representative of the books, it probably is good they had someone like Kathleen Turner involved, you know, fighting for it, since Paretsky wasn't as much. And I mean, I guess then it's probably good for them that Kathleen Turner was the one who ended up involved, because there were some other names attached initially, or not attached, but Chris, do you have the list of, there were other actresses they were definitely looking at before settling on Kathleen Turner, correct?
Yeah, there was three main players, Amy Madigan, Bette Midler, and Jane Fonda.
Yeah. And like, without getting into what I think about the movie just yet, I will say of those names, I do think Kathleen Turner was the right choice here, actually. You know, those other actresses might have been entertaining in the role, but I think Kathleen Turner is more suited for this kind of part, this kind of genre. And I don't think those other actresses would have fought for any sort of integrity the way, at least as down and dirty as Kathleen Turner does, because that's been Turner's whole, like, her whole reputation.
100%. Yeah. So should we just get into the film proper now?
Yeah, why not? I don't have much more to say about the making of V.I. Warshawski.
Okay, sounds good.
W-A-R. Private investigator. S-H-A-W.
You don't look much like a private detective to me.
S-K-I.
Who are you?
Warshawski. V.I. Warshawski.
Kathleen Turner is V.I. Warshawski.
What does V stand for?
Virtuous.
And the I?
Inquisitive. Looking for something?
Just because she's a woman
You know how hard it is to get blood out of cashmere?
doesn't mean she's always a lady.
Get to the point, bonehead. Sorry about that, guys. You know what this is?
It's a nutcracker.
You know what we do with nutcrackers?
You let a broad do this to you?
V.I. Warshawski.
Babe alert!
What's that V stand for?
My first name.
You're a funny lady.
Try beautiful. It works much better, believe me.
I'm hiring you to find out who killed my dad.
Being a detective is no job for a girl like you.
These guys are playing hardball.
I got this feeling in my gut.
Woman's intuition. Get off the case.
Never underestimate a woman.
Kathleen Turner is
Warshawski.
Warshawski. B.I. Warshawski.
You're about this close.
What's that? Your IQ or the size of your...
V.I. Warshawski.
My friends call me Vic.
V.I. Warshawski is a tough, no-nonsense female private eye based out of Chicago. After some heartbreak and a few drinks, she picks up a handsome hockey player at a bar, whose body is pulled out of Lake Michigan later that night, leaving her to care for his foul-mouthed young daughter. Warshawski finds herself not only investigating the suspicious murder plot, but now also protecting the child at all costs from multiple interested parties.
That is indeed the plot to V.I. Warshawski. Chris, I think I'm more curious in this case to hear what you think first. As someone who, I don't know, like I just feel like you haven't watched as many movies from this time period as I have, or whatever. Weren't even aware of this movie before, so I'm kind of curious to hear what you thought about it as someone who maybe doesn't even have the same backlog of like noir PI movies like I do.
Yeah, I find this movie is... It's not bad.
Right.
Okay, like it's not bad. It's not great. It's gonna fall into the kind of the worst types of movies that we talk about, I think, is where they're just kind of blah and they're just kind of there. And I think this movie makes a fundamental mistake by leaning too heavily into cliche female things. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the issue with having four men in charge of this. And usually I don't care about who's making movies for what gender or race or demographic. You know that about me. I don't really get hot and bothered about who should be writing for who or who makes what movie for what. But I feel in this movie, especially for the time period of 1991, it was kind of obnoxious just how obvious they were like, this is a female movie, you know? And it kind of alienates the audience in one sense. Like I felt that this movie about a no-nonsense private eye just became a movie about a surrogate mother. Mm-hmm. And I did not like that. I found that maybe betrayed the character that I didn't even really know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know this character, but it just felt so out of left field that, oh, this is a movie where she has to take care of a child because that's what mothers do, you know? And I think that this movie, it might be the fastest movie ever to fail the Bechdel test. And let's remind, listeners what the Bechdel test is that you need to have two female characters on screen together in a conversation and they do not talk about men. And really the first conversation that you see VI in is with, a bartender friend at a bar she frequents talking about a man that is cheating on her and that she needs to have a drink to get over it. And also they start talking about shoes. Mm-hmm. And I was a little bit like, oh, well, that's kind of icky, And I think that's the issue with the movie is that it's too focused on being a female movie than even having a interesting mystery. Because the mystery is not interesting. And you can tell what the outcome is a mile away. I'm not going to spoil it right now, but if you saw the first 10 minutes of the movie, you know what the ending is.
Yeah, almost to the point where I wasn't even sure if if it was like supposed to be a mystery.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I'm actually slightly more positive than you, but this is interesting because I think I'm more positive in a way where I don't disagree with what you've said, and I also don't necessarily think it's a great movie, but I'll try to explain why I'm more positive. So first of all, just to backtrack, I don't disagree with what you said, but also, and I think you would agree, the Bechdel test is a kind of a fun thing to use sometimes, but it's also not the end all be all.
No, of course.
Trying to figure, and people kind of overvalue at that a little bit. But I get what you're saying. There are a lot of moments in this movie that stick out like a sore thumb of clumsy attempts from male writers to try and do like the female empowerment thing or to fall over themselves to degrade Vi Warshawski a little bit, right? Not
Yes.
being comfortable enough to let her be the hero she should be. However, why I think I'm a little bit more positive is I want to run a word by you, Chris, and then kind of explain what I mean. I found this movie somewhat just comfortable. Does that make any sense? Because so what I actually wrote in my notes was I said this movie is better today than it would have been in 1991. And I think what I mean is if I had seen this in 91, I think obviously how most audiences probably felt in 91, when we were getting a lot of like kind of, lower budget, mid-budget, just kind of singular kind of movies, this probably did seem very forgettable and kind of interchangeable and, not very memorable, just a kind of nothing movie. That certainly seems to vibe with the box office and the reviews at the time. Mm-hmm. Watching it today, when we were inundated with huge budget, mega franchise, flashy blockbusters, there was something just kind of like pleasantly charming about how small scale this felt a little bit, so that's where I was watching and thinking, okay, this isn't great, but I'm not ever bored. I was reasonably entertained throughout. And I think a lot of that has to do with Kathleen Turner, who I think she's working very hard to make this movie better than it is. And the last thing I'll say in just my general thoughts is the last thing I wrote in my notes was, this is an okay movie with a genuinely legit good ending. I do think like the last 10 or 15 minutes when you get to the actual climax, like I said, it's coming, but I actually think there's some pretty exciting stuff there. Like I won't spoil it yet, but when you get to the final, the big finale on the docks, pretty much everything that happens there, I was actually into, which is surprising because, as you said, the mystery hadn't really grabbed. I wasn't super invested in all these characters, but the finale is designed in a way where I was like, oh, this is decent here. This is pretty fun. I'm interested in what's happening. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm mixed on this. Like I said, I'm probably with you just being middle of the road.
Yeah.
But I had a decent enough time watching it, I think.
Well, I think all the positives that you have for the movie, and also the ones that I do too, really rest on Kathleen Turner. She's the star for a reason. She's smart. She's feisty. She is kind of exactly what you want VI to be. The issue, I think, is everybody else, And I think suiting her up with this child sidekick for the whole runtime is dicey, to say the least. The kid actress is fine, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere because let's just kind of talk about the plot a little bit for the listener. Vi meets this hockey player in a bar. They start to hook up. They go for a walk, and VI's like, no, not tonight, because she's in charge of herself. That's what we like about her. That's very much true to character from the book. So she goes home. She takes a bath, thinks about the day, and then for whatever reason, the hockey player shows up at her house and barges in with his daughter now and basically just says, hey, you got to look after my daughter while I go to this meeting. And I think it's just happening too quickly and it makes no sense. And VI's totally okay with it, which is just the strange part to me, was that this is happening so fast. We're 15 minutes into the movie and this is all happening in the same night, And I feel like that's where I was so thrown off. That why is she okay with taking care of this kid? Because then, 2 minutes later, the hockey player boom boom gets boom boom blowed up, and she has to take care of the kid because the kid has no family at this point. So that's what was bothersome to me. And it just didn't feel in line with that character, even though I was only with that character for a short amount of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and you're not wrong. And I think what that speaks to, if you get to we talked already about Sara Paretsky kind of losing control of this a little bit and them, these men making their own changes to it. I'm sure you saw, Chris, that the character of Boom Boom in the novel was not a one-night stand or a potential one-night stand. It was actually her cousin.
Yeah.
So there was a familial relationship there. The little girl is a original character for this movie, but based on a different girl that she ends up kind of taking care of in one of the other novels that it sounds like she had more history with. So it's they're cherry picking elements from the first three V.I. Warshawski novels that they want to use to set up this story, but they have to put them into play so quickly that you're right. The first 15 minutes in particular, this movie don't really vibe very well. And that's why I said I much prefer the back half of this film.
Yeah,
because I think you're absolutely right that the setup here is very clunky. Where I will slightly disagree with you is when you said that like all your positives are with Kathleen Turner and you kind of don't like anyone else. Now, see, I was looking at this as not only like a singular movie, but I was also saying to myself, okay, well, like let's view this as a potential franchise starter. And let's view it as someone who, like, I do enjoy those kind of noir detective series. Like, there's the old series like The Thin Man I love. I read, like, the Mike Hammer novels by Mickey Spillane. And the thing with all those series is there's always the main PI. There's your main hard-boiled character, which is VI in this case. And then there are a supporting cast of characters that will kind of repeat over and over in each story. And I actually think this movie does a decent job setting up what I found to be a fairly interesting group of supporting characters. I wouldn't say I was like super into her relationship with Murray, her like on again, off again reporter boyfriend, but I did like Charles Durning as the old cop who like knew her dad and never wants her to get involved with cases, but you can tell he actually kind of, it's because he like cares about her. He loves her, sees her as his own daughter, essentially. He's like a father figure. I actually could even see the girl, you know, maybe it's a little too on the nose how she's got the dirty mouth too and she's like a little VI. But I could see her being like a decent character in like sequels, you know, if they want to keep, because that's kind of an old cliche too, right? The hard-boiled adult detective who gets paired up with a little kid. I was thinking of even Dick Tracy does that, you know, the Warren Beatty movie. So I could see that kid coming back in sequels and being around. So I thought there was like potential here for like a good cast of characters. So I didn't, maybe not all the performances were as good as Kathleen Turner, but I liked some of these characters, or at least what they meant to her world.
Yeah, and I think I liked a little bit of Murray. Like J.O. Sanders is a actor that pops up in like a million things.
Yeah, he's like one of those very recognizable guys. Yeah.
Yeah, and he gives off big David Harbour energy.
Yes.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great. I didn't think that, but that's a great comparison.
Yeah. As soon as I saw him in this, I was like, is he related to David Harbour at all? Or they have just like a similar vibe, even the same similar cadence, almost similar face. Truly. So I dug that for sure, and I did like them together. Now, coming to think about it, I would say that he was maybe one of my more favorite supporting cast. I would like to see their relationship grow into multiple sequels that we never got. But yeah, the weird part with Boom Boom being her sort of lover one night stand in this versus a family member, it just never hits. You know, like there's just no emotion there because why? Again, this character is some no-nonsense, truly independent woman. Why does she give a shit about this, you know, this bro-y hockey player that dies? You know, other than just being, you know, just a regular human being with empathy. But why does she care so much that she has to take care of this kid now? And again, I have to tack that up to, well, because that's what mothers do. And I think that's where the movie falls apart to me. I listed off a few things that this movie does without getting into spoilers, but that likes to remind you that VI is female. Okay? Would you indulge me in this?
Sure.
The first thing we see VI do in this movie is she weighs herself, and then she has to go for a run because she's got to lose weight, right? You know, so now it's feeding into women and their self-esteem issues, right? And then, like I said, the mention about always talking about men, and you know, then they start talking about shoes right away, and then VI is with the kid alone in their apartment, and guess what? They start talking about babies, Trev, and then the little girl starts trying on VI's clothes, tries on a dress and some shoes, right? And then she becomes a surrogate mother, and then later on, guess what they do, Trev? They stop for ice cream, you know, to discuss things, because that's what mothers and daughters do. And I just felt just so talked down to.
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? Like, just so cliche.
What's frustrating is there are easy fixes to all this. And I know that now we are two men purporting to fix the problems of three other men who we say should not be writing this in the first place. But like the thing with like Boom Boom, you know, just being this potential one night stand and then bringing this daughter and being like, can you take care of my daughter? Like, okay, if for whatever reason you wanted to make the change of, you're a writer, you don't like the idea of it being her cousin, you want it to be some kind of romantic attachment, why not just have the movie start and say she's been dating this guy for like a while? Right?
Yeah.
Instead of her meeting him in the first few minutes of the movie, say like that Boom Boom has been my on again, off again guy for like a while, and then suddenly he springs a daughter on her that she didn't know about. But now when he dies, it's like, well, I spent like the past couple months with Boom Boom, so now I actually do feel indebted to try and take care of his daughter. And then there's like the thing where, you know, the thing with we were saying, like the daughter coming and having to be with her and talking about babies and everything, that would be fine if you had Vi react more like, you know, harsh against it, you know, like if you were using that to build Vic. I'm just going to start saying Vic instead of Vi because that's what her friends call her. Because we didn't even mention her. The VI stands for Victoria Iphigenia, I think. I'm not even sure how to say
Vagina?
No. But obviously a big joke in the movie is every time people ask her what does the V stand for, she's got like different answers to it. Or what does the VI stand for? Very inquisitive is the one I remember her saying at one point. But if she was always like, whenever the daughter's like, yeah, I'm doing this school project and I have to take care of an egg, which by the way, did the girls in your school ever have to do that project? The taking care of eggs as like babies? Me neither. And yet I've seen it in like so many movies and TV shows. I wonder if any schools actually do it or if it's just a movie thing. But when the daughter is like, yeah, I got to take care of this egg and as it be a baby, like use that as a moment to just have Vic be like, being a mom is stupid. Like it sucks, right? Like just push that more to like build her character. Her and the daughter become best buddies too quick in this, I think. I think you want to see them antagonistic for most of the movie and have them start to like warm up to each other more near the end. But the way it's kind of structured here, Kat, the daughter, she gets over her dad's death and starts loving hanging out with Vi or Vic way too fast. That's another like, issue. Yeah.
Kat is extremely lively, having just seen her dad's burnt corpse 2 nights ago. It's stupid. Like it's just dumb. And you're saying about how the movie fixes a little bit of the problems if Vic was, you know, less into this relationship with the kid. There's a scene where she speaks to, I think, Murray at a time and says, "Do you think I'd be a good mom?" It comes out of no. We've only spent what, like it's been one night. It's been one night with this, you know, obnoxious child by her side. I don't get it. It just never sells that idea well. And I think that's the main crux of the movie, right? Is their relationship, is the fight to discover who killed Kat's dad and uncover the plot that is trying to kill Kat.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't do the work.
No, you're absolutely right. Even as someone like you and I have not read any of the novels, but I think when you have those moments where like that early in the movie where she says like she's been with this girl for a couple days or not even just like one day and it's already wondering like I wonder if I'm like a good mother figure, like my eyebrows definitely raised and I feel like that doesn't feel like in the vibe of this character or like what this character should be, because I do want this character and the movie's positioning this character to really be the female version of like you know, a Sam Spade or you know, a Mike Hammer. And I think I was going to say the template, but this didn't exist yet at this point. But you know what this movie is trying to do, and the better example of this is Alan Grant in Jurassic Park, right? Alan Grant, who like hates kids.
Now I'm listening to you finally.
Yeah, now I got you. Yeah. When I bring up Chris's favorite movie of all time, he finally starts listening. But you know, like the Alan Grant relationship with those kids, right? They don't do any like on the nose dialogue or anything about it. He doesn't like 30 minutes in the movie go like, you know what? I wonder if I would be a good dad. You start to see over through the course of the film how he starts to care about the kids more as he has to protect them. And that's what this movie could have done. If this movie did it all as like subtext and not in the dialogue and had her and Kat really at each other's throats for like the whole first like 40 minutes or so. But then, you know, when, you know, you have these different like, you know, mobsters and toughs who come after them. When she actually has to protect the kid, she suddenly starts to realize, oh, you know, I guess I do kind of care about this kid. And don't even make it a thing about how she starts to think, oh, maybe I'd be a good mom. Just she likes this kid. You know, like this kid is like her. She sees that. And it's not even like a daughter. It's more like a friend. Like I have a young friend. People will still be able to read to that. They'll get their like mother-daughter, you know, vibe or whatever. But you don't have to put it into the dialogue. And that's where, like you said already, I know we're just repeating the same thing, but that's where you really feel like these male writers speaking down to the material a little bit. Yeah.
And typically I love a short runtime, you know, like this movie is 88 minutes. Like it's in and out and we're done. We're on to the next. But this is one of those cases where I'm like, man, this movie needs 20 minutes. This needs to develop this relationship, this push and pull. It has to do something in the backstory for me to even know who Vic is. I think the movie's at odds with itself. that it wants you to think that Vic is this hard-boiled detective, but then also it's also too goofy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if it really fits. And again, you're more well versed in the film noir type detective stories, but is this a usual conflict?
Which conflict?
Like in tone, I would say. Maybe tone is the right
No,
word.
and that's the thing. So like, you, again, from that great article that you sent me and you already quoted from, the Nicole DeCure article, that's where I think both of us learned that the Paretsky novels are apparently like much more serious. Like, there is humor to them, but they're not comedies, right? They're more serious, like mysteries with a slight comedic bend, whereas this is really leaning into the comedy. And I think, again, wonder if that was that the male writers of this time, of this film, saying, well, if it's a female detective, it has to be funny, right? It can't be serious. It can't be as as dead serious as it would be with a man in the lead. And I like all the one-liners that VI has. Like, sorry, did you hear that bell?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Push this cat down. All right. I like all the one-liners Vic has.
Hey, I already told you everything I know.
Yeah. He always did suffer from premature articulation.
Like, I think that's the kind of humor you want, because that's always the thing. Like, these hard-boiled detectives, they don't suffer fools lightly. So when people come for them, there's a great moment in this where I wrote this one down. This might be my favorite one-liner in the movie, when she's being threatened by a man. He's got like a knife to her throat, and he says to her, obviously he's trying to like kind of sexually threaten her, and he says, I fuck a lot, more than 500 women. And Vic says, just can't get the hang of it, huh? Like, I like moments like that. I like when she has those snappy comebacks to men, But the movie has an overall goofy tone that's not serving. This is where it gets tricky, because I feel like nowadays, now that we're out of the 50s, pretty much like every time since, this is what I was alluding to earlier, anytime someone makes one of these noir detective stories, it's way too tempting to make it into a parody of that genre.
Right.
To make it a satire and like goof around with the genre. When honestly, if you just like lean into the genre, the humor will be there anyways, especially like from a modern audience, because they are kind of like outdated. It is an old genre, and that's where the humor can come from. I maybe I'm rambling, but so to answer your question, no, I wish there was less comedy in this, like, because it is underserving it, and all the best parts of this movie, I think, are the moments where it gets really serious. Like I said, I think the last 10 minutes is like dead serious, and I think it works very, very well.
Yeah.
When she there's a kind of a shocking moment in this about halfway through, when she gets like kidnapped by some toughs. I kind of like using the old slang when I'm talking about these kind of.
Yeah, I was about to say, you're showing your age.
Yeah, but these hoodlums kidnap her and bring her to their boss, played by Wayne Knight, another Jurassic Park connection.
Hold on. I actually want to say this. I don't know if you've caught this, because obviously you caught the Wayne Knight Jurassic connection, but from our discussion. But did you know all three characters in that scene are Seinfeld players?
So one of them I definitely recognized, but not. Yeah.
So Wayne Knight plays Newman, obviously.
Yeah.
Let me ask you something. What do you do for a living, Newman?
I'm a United States postal worker.
Aren't those the guys that always go crazy and come back with a gun and shoot everybody?
Sometimes.
Why is that?
Because the mail never stops. It just keeps coming and coming and coming. There's never a let-up. It's relentless. Every day it piles up more and more and more, and you got to get it up. And the more you get out, the more it keeps coming in. And then the barcode reader breaks, and it's Publishers Clearinghouse.
All right.
Michael Haggerty plays Rudy, the guy who buys the raincoats from Jerry's dad.
You can keep your raincoats. I'm not interested.
And I thought we had a deal.
That's another one of my shirts. I'm not buying any more clothes from anyone off the street.
Who's off the street? I'm in the raincoat business 35 years.
Yeah, I know there are moths like his stuff. My clothes don't have moths.
Because of his moths, you're not buying my raincoats?
That's right.
Yes, right. And he's another one of those actors who's just in so many things. Like,
yes.
He sticks out to me. Like, yeah.
And Lee Ehrenberg, who plays Mike Moffat, Kramer's friend who gets his thumb smashed in the trunk of the car. You know?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy who's like, he pretends to like Jerry, but he talks shit behind his back.
Well, I don't want to go if Jerry's not going.
Why won't you go if I go? Why? I'll tell you why.
No, don't, Jerry.
Like you didn't call me a phony?
What? Thanks. Real good.
Jerry? First of all, I think you completely misunderstood what I said. I meant it in a complimentary way. I mean, you know, when people say he's bad, it really means he's good, that sort of thing. You know, it's slang.
Use it in a sentence.
Man, that Michael Jordan is so phony. Why'd you tell her? He begged you!
Well, I recognized him more as being, he's one of the, in Pirates of the Caribbean. He's like Pintel, one of Barbossa's crew. And I promise I knew that off the top of my head, and I did not just look it up. But no, what I wanted to say about that scene is, and this is something you and I have talked about with other movies, they actually beat the shit out of her. Like, there's actually a really kind of well done moment where Wayne Knight hits her across the face, and she instantly starts bleeding from the nose and the mouth.
Ah, shit. You know how hard it is to get blood out of cashmere?
And I thought, like, I don't know exactly. I mean, obviously she could have had the blood in her mouth, but I don't know quite how they rigged the blood to come out of her nose like so quickly.
Yeah,
but like,
I thought the same thing.
But I was just like taken aback by that moment because you don't see female characters treated that way that often. And I don't think if you made this movie today, you would. I don't think they would let the female character get beaten up like that.
No.
And we can have this whole like conversation about should you or not. But I think the thing is like when you watch this movie, you always know she's going to get hers, right? She's going to come back and get at these men. Although I guess in this case, this is not a character that's necessarily revisited. But again, it maybe feels like franchise stuff because like Wayne Knight's supposed to be playing this like well-known gangster in Chicago, and I'm guessing he would have even come back in sequels.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, but that's what I mean. Like when you actually feel like she's being threatened, when she's up against like real stakes, when the danger is real, that's when the movie's at its best. Not when it's trying to be goofy fun times.
Speaking to the action, there's a great boat chase through the rivers of Chicago. Mm-hmm. I thought that was awesome.
Otherwise known as the Chicago River. But
is that what it is? Okay. Yeah. As your fellow Canadian, I'm just like bodies of water. But no, the boat chase is awesome. It's like cinematically, it looks great. There's aerial shots, all done real, all done practically. They're putting the actors on the boats themselves. You can tell that these are the actors there. Very, very good. I was the movie really came to life for me there. I was pretty shocked that they had such a great action scene. There, yeah,
and it has a fun like denouement too. Like the way that chase ends is like a nice little. You don't see it coming. I think like the way she gets out of it is a nice little trick, right?
Yeah.
Like so, yeah, I like the whole sequence as well. So yeah, it's like it's weird because like there is definitely some stuff to like here. It's the movie. God, this is like so complicated because I haven't read the novel. So this is the tough thing, right? Like the question does obviously become, would they have been better off just filming the books as they are? Because we both read that article, but we'll say, you know, I really like that article. I thought Nicole DeCure wrote that very well. It did help us kind of understand what might have been some of the issues with this as an adaptation. At the same time, it was very much written from the perspective of like, well, these books are great. You should just make the books. And we both know that's not always the case.
Right.
Right? Like movies are different. So some of these changes maybe were for the best. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like I said, I don't hate the idea of giving her like a young sidekick. It's just like everything they do. I guess what I'm trying to say is all the pieces seem like they're the right ideas, but they execute a lot of them the wrong way. Like you mentioned earlier, the fact about how the mystery is not a mystery. That didn't even bother me so much because I think when you watch one of these like noir PI movies, very often the plots are very convoluted. I thought that was kind of the case with this one too. Like it's simple, it's easy to figure out, but you kind of do start to gloss over a little bit and lose details of it as you're watching.
Mm-hmm.
But like the decision to make the guy who's ultimately revealed to be the bad guy so clearly evil in just the way he looks, the way he acts, like there is no mystery. Right? In fact, didn't you keep waiting for? I thought the reveal was going to be like, oh no, he's actually not that bad, and the other brother is like the bad guy. Like I was like, that's got to be the twist, right? But no, it's not. It's the guy who's basically he doesn't have a mustache, but if he did, he'd be like twirling it the first time you see him. Yeah, he's the bad guy, of course.
Yeah, and I think that's what like I need in my detective movie. I would like to be a little surprised, you know? And I think that's where another failure of the movie is that the mystery is just not compelling. It's obvious. It's something that fundamentally I think you require in a movie like this. Mm-hmm. So when it fails that hard, I can't really give it that many props. But again, the movie is not awful. You know, like it's not a bad movie. oh man, it's hard to talk about this one. It really is. You know, like, we come across this every once in a while where there's a movie that's hard to talk about because it doesn't really elicit, you know, my anger or your sadness. You know, there's no there. And I think that's what sucks. And I mean, that makes sense, right? Like, the movie did not take off. It did not appeal to the audiences that saw it. Fans of the fans of the book, didn't hope for more. You know, just kind of died on the vine, right?
Can I actually make an important point over here? If we're looking for something to talk about, let's talk about the name of this movie.
All right? It's horrible.
Yes. So that, I honestly think, like, look, I'm no expert, obviously. I've never been put in charge of, like, putting a movie out and making sure it's a hit. But I want to, like, so here are the names of the V.I. Warshawski novels, right? You already mentioned. So the first three are Indemnity Only, Deadlock, Killing Orders. Then you go into, I'm not going to read them all, but you have, like, Bitter Medicine, Guardian Angel, Hard Time, Fire Sale, Bodywork, Critical Mass. The one that's coming out this year is called Overboard. You'll notice that none of those are called V.I. Warshawski. And that's probably a smart decision, right?
Yeah.
Like, why not use Deadlock as the title? You know, like, I get it. I mean, obviously the joke of her name, the fact that people have a hard time pronouncing it, the fact that nobody knows what V.I. stands for, that's the running gag of the movie. But it is a shitty movie title, and I bet that turned a lot of people off. I bet people just didn't get it. So that's definitely part of it. I wish I could go back in time and, like, kind of remind myself. Obviously, we have seen the trailer and everything, but just in general marketing, I wonder if they were trying to market this more towards men than towards women. You know, so this might have been like a mixed, you know, the mixed messages of not knowing who the target audience is meant to be. Because I'm guessing, obviously, the readership of the novels, I'm sure, skews heavily female. And I'm betting that's not who necessarily came to see it in the theater, so that could be a problem too.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that they're almost trying to confuse the audience to get men to see the movie, you know. Mm-hmm. And in the film itself, they have this scene where somebody asks Vic, like, why do you go by VI? And she says, well, I do it because then it's easier to get by in my line of work. You know, like, it's people take you more seriously when they don't know I'm a woman. Yeah. And it's interesting that quite possibly you're correct that the producers of this movie tried to trick the audience into come see it, you know, because they weren't so sure who was going to come, which is funny because one of the producers is actually quoted here saying, "My hope is that this movie will be Hollywood's catching up to the reality of women in society."
That's a pretty highfalutin statement for a movie like V.I. Warshawski.
Yes.
And that really is the issue. Like, I was just now thinking to go back to a question you asked me earlier, where you said, like, is this really in line with, like, what, you know, these kind of detective movies are usually like from this genre? I think, again, not having read Sara Paretsky's novels, but I'm guessing a big part of the hook of those novels initially when they started coming out in the 80s was that, hey, here is someone, like, writing those kind of old school detective novels that were a big deal back in the day that have remained popular, but finally with, like, a woman in the lead, right? And that's actually kind of enough, you know? The gimmick of this movie should sell itself. V.I. Warshawski, Kathleen Turner, she's the hard-boiled detective. She's the badass who gets involved in cases even though the cops are telling her to stay out. She's the one who the bad guys keep underestimating. She's the one who figures everything out. That's enough. You know, that would actually be, this movie would feel like more empowering, would feel more exciting if you just did that. If you basically wrote the script almost to the point where you could actually have a guy play VI, you know?
Yeah.
And then just have Kathleen Turner play it. By consistently drawing attention to itself with these jokes about shoes and, like, you know, Cinderella jokes, even the speedboat chase that we just said we both loved. The speedboat chase is great. However, it does end with someone saying she can handle my hose anytime. You're like, oh, you know, like, if you took all that stuff out, the movie would be better suited because, like I said, it's at its worst when it feels like men who think it's funny that VI is a woman. Who think it's like that's the joke of the movie, and that shouldn't be the joke. That should be the selling point instead.
There's even a moment where you know, those goons played by the Seinfeld players bring her to a warehouse, and she never realized she just had one shoe on the whole car ride. Mm-hmm. First of all, now she looks like an idiot. right?
Yeah.
Like your main detective doesn't realize she was wearing one shoe for an entire car ride. And then also, again, we got to talk about her shoes, right? The shoes become a main plot point. And that's where I keep going back to where this movie's failures are for me, is just reminding me every single time that I'm watching a female protagonist. And maybe in 1991, you needed to do that, right? But I am watching it with the eyes of a 2022 person, and it just comes off lame, for lack of a better word.
Yes, but again, so now this is why this movie is difficult to talk about. This is what's making this a tough episode, because let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. I don't disagree, but then at the same time, to go back to what I said about how I think this movie plays a little better today than it does in 1991, I did watch this, and even though we say they talk, they had the dumb thing with her, like trying to hook up with this guy, there's the stuff with the shoes, it was kind of noticeable to me that she's certainly not overly sexualized. There is a scene with her in like the tub, and I saw like that article say, look, maybe that's just them trying to get like more skin, but that it's not like it's not showing a lot, right? She's just like in the tub. There's a moment where she like changes her outfit in the back of a car, but for Kathleen Turner being like the body heat actress and coming onto the scene as like this, sex icon, and even just a couple years after playing Jessica Rabbit, who was even in animated form like meant to be a sex icon, I did think they actually, I don't know, in my opinion, this movie tread that line pretty nicely of not making her like I didn't think the male gaze was too bad in this film, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I think the movie handles that aspect at least respectfully enough that they do portray her as mostly just a detective, and they don't like, the movie's not trying to get people horny watching it, and I did appreciate that. And I think that's actually, I feel like today that would actually maybe be worse. So I was like kind of taken like, this in 91 it wasn't like they weren't trying to be all like sexy with it.
I agree with you. That also could be Kathleen Turner putting her foot down.
It could be, yeah.
Right? Because like again, at the time of this, she's 10 years into being an absolute icon. Mm-hmm. So maybe those shots held longer, before she was like, hey, fucking cut that down. Or no, you're not.
10 years into being an icon and like not wanting to be a sex icon, right?
Yeah.
Just being like a big icon and like really looking at this like, no, I just want to play like a badass detective.
Yeah. She could curate her career a lot more at this point. Honestly, Vic just kind of comes off as a mature, strong, independent female character. You know what I mean? And I think that is totally fine. She seems like an everyday person, but with a strong personality, which is great. And I think that's what is endearing to this character. But the problem, like I've said a few times now, is just everything that's happening around her. It's just too goofy. It's too silly. They point out her femalisms too many times. And I don't know. It would have been better if it was a true hard-boiled, not deathly serious. That's not what I mean. But I think that the moments of humor could come from her, which she's already doing. Like when actually my second favorite line in the movie actually takes place at 4 minutes into the film, is when she parks her car in front of the bar. And then she stares at a bunch of, what's the word you used for them? Hoodlums?
Toughs.
Toughs, a bunch of toughs.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So she looks at a bunch of hoodlums and toughs and goes, hey, do me a favor, guys. Steal that. And then she just walks back in. And I think that's great. That's a great line.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Anyway. Another good line I wanted to draw attention to, I can't remember exactly where this falls, but I wrote in my notes when she says, never underestimate a man's ability to underestimate a woman. See, that's a great line. Mm-hmm. And I noticed in that article we read that was pointed out that line is original. That line was never said in the novels. And I was like, well, these idiot dudes who wrote this, at least they got like one good one in. They kind of got the part. But just to backtrack just a second, you just mentioned how it should have been a little bit more hard-boiled. To that end, you know what this movie needed, Chris? I want to see if you agree with me. If this really wanted to position itself as like a hard-boiled, like true neo-noir, like in the style of Maltese Falcon and all those like kind of classic, PI stories, I wish this movie had a voiceover from Vic.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why, especially that's a good idea for this, because you have Kathleen Turner in the lead, an actress who is most known for like her smoky, like, husky voice. Which she's always used to like great effect. I mean, that's why she's so great as Jessica Rabbit, right? She's just got this like iconic voice, and that voice should be doing a voiceover here, and that voiceover is what can like clear up some of the more confusing plot elements with the voiceovers where you can like kind of lean into like more of the noir cliches. I think the movie would actually be really well suited to have that. So I wish they had included that. Even if like I'm not sure if the novels are like first person or not, but they really should have done that in this movie.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. That was a big highlight for me in this year's The Batman. That's something that I wished was used more. You know, they used it a couple times as more or less bookends for Robert Pattinson to do some of Bruce Wayne's monologues as a narration. But it really sets the tone. It sets the world. And I love it. So you're so right. I didn't even think of that during this.
I think most times, like, voiceover is terrible. Like, you know, usually when it's used in movies, it kind of means that, like, they feel like they had to, like, clear something up that they didn't get right in the first edit or something.
Sure.
And it doesn't, like, I always point to Scorsese's Gangs of New York as an example of where the voiceover becomes so incessant in the last half hour, and you feel like it's him being like, we need him to explain everything that's happening. Like, I love that movie, but I think it gets a little off the rails there at the end. And obviously Blade Runner, a movie that I like much more than you do, but that's a great example of one where the voiceover is terrible, and once they took it out, it was much better. But I think this movie would definitely like be well suited to it.
First of all, before any of our listeners come at me saying you don't like Blade Runner, okay, like I do like Blade Runner, number one.
Yeah.
I much prefer 2049.
Yeah. And to be fair, I also prefer 2049, but at least I do like Blade Runner, unlike you, who said it's a piece of shit. Anyway,
you just like the when Harrison doesn't let her leave the apartment. That's your favorite scene.
Well, you know, as I said earlier, I did mention earlier how the noir stories, you know, do have a lot of moments you're like, so
yeah.
That one is not that one's not immune to that either.
Another thing about this movie, Trev, and I think it's time. It's been a few episodes, but I think it's score whore time.
Oh yeah, we've been really neglecting our score whore duties here.
Yeah. There's been a lot of really bad scores in the last few movies that we've been talking about. Very boring, meandering kind of white noise.
Let's be clear to our listeners. Just because we haven't talked in a while doesn't mean we're not score whores anymore. Instead, when we don't do a score whore, just assume the music is meaningless.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Window dressing, if you will. But I will say, in this movie, Randy Edelman is the composer. He has scored one of my all-time favorite scores in Dragonheart, a movie that I do love, Trev, and I know you do not. But the Dragonheart score is legendary music.
Did he come back and score all the straight-to-video sequels that I can only assume you also love?
I have not seen those ones, but I will say, look to the stars, boy. Look to the stars.
Okay. Right. That's a great Dennis Quaid. You're pretty good.
Anyway, he does the score for this movie, and I think the main theme is pretty great. It's pretty great.
Yeah, and that's a moment where, remember earlier I said this movie feels like comfortable to me? This is a great example, because that score comes on immediately, that main theme comes on immediately over the opening credits. And there was just something about that song, that music, over those opening credits, like the city shots of Chicago, where it's like, oh, this feels so 90s. You know, like early 90s or like late 80s, like whatever the way. But it just like, it put me in a mood right away. Like that's one thing I'll say to it. And I kind of, that's what I mean. I kind of never fell out of that mood. This is the thing. Like this, I agree. The score is very fun in this movie. I think it's appropriate. But just to kind of start wrapping up in general, to use that as a framing device for this, you and I are having a kind of a tough time talking about this because we both feel like, I don't know, it's like an okay whatever movie, but that's ultimately the tough thing about this film. Like, would I recommend this to someone? It's where, well, first of all, who cares? No one. This is, I think, another reason this is a pointless conversation is because no one's going to go watch VR Warshawski because we talked about it.
No, even though it is on Disney Plus, that's where I watched it. So
in Canada, it is. We don't have it on Disney Plus here. Let me tell you that.
Oh. Okay.
Like, you and I have definitely watched movies before that are just kind of like whatever, right? And that are like meandering, are not bad but not good. And this falls into that realm. And this is going to continue to be a mostly forgotten movie. You and I are certainly not going to start a V.I. Warshawski resurgence here. But would I ultimately try to fight for anyone to watch this? And I would only say I think this movie today, in 2022 or 2023, whenever you listen to this episode, whatever, it might be a fun watch specifically for people who are a fan of this genre, who are a fan of like those old hard-boiled detective movies, because I think that's why I liked it more than you. I'm not trying to throw. This is not me trying to be like hipster. Like I've watched more movies than you. Sure. But I do think I honestly do think it plays a little bit better if you have a little bit more frame of reference for that genre, and when you see this as like what it's trying to do within that genre, how this is trying to like supplant some of those cliches by putting a woman in the lead role instead of having her be the secretary or whatever. It works just slightly better, I think.
Right.
If someone is not that into like that kind of detective movie, then really there's not much here, unfortunately. And that's why, it's not the most interesting movie to talk about. Maybe, hopefully our listeners think it was kind of interesting to listen to us talk about it. But I think that's the tricky thing is I think this movie has a very, very small target audience even today. But that target audience might get a kick out of it at least a little bit.
Yeah, like I even had a hard time searching for stuff like on YouTube, like for like research or what the general populace thought about the movie. And well, there's not many of those. No. Not many.
But like the character of Warshawski clearly has fans because the novel series is still going. And we will say, I think from what I can see, I think a large segment of that fan base was not pleased with this movie for the same reason Sara Paretsky ended up not being pleased with it. The overabundance of comedy, the kind of maybe too male voice of it all. However, it seems like everybody agreed Kathleen Turner was like the right choice for it, right? And she did get to go on. There was no sequels to this movie, but did you see, Chris, that she did play V.I. Warshawski again twice?
Yes, in a radio play, right?
Yes. Yeah, the BBC did 4 V.I. Warshawski like radio dramas because the BBC still does those radio dramas. That's kind of still a somewhat booming industry over there. But they did 4 V.I. Warshawski ones, and she voiced the character in the first 2. She did not come back for the later ones, and we can actually talk about why that is in a moment. But she at least has played the character again, and it seems like people do like her as this character. So at least that's a small victory for it.
And I think like usually we ask each other, would we have wanted more, of these movies? And I would say I would have liked to see Kathleen Turner do another one. I would have liked to see her take another shot at it. The only issue is that they've kind of written themselves into a corner with this kid at the end, And like I was half expecting, because this fucking thing is owned by Disney, that Kat at this point, spoilers for V.I. Warshawski, spoilers, doesn't have any parents at the end of this movie. So I was half expecting her to like turn to a cop when they're like, "What's your name, kid?" And she just turns to the cop and goes, Kat Warshawski.
She's like, K Warshawski.
Yeah. And I was just like, oh yeah. Like I was really, really expecting that. And then honestly, that would be the legacy sequel here, is that she would come back. The actress Angela Goethals,
who we will actually talk about again eventually. I don't want to say too much about that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can. There's your legacy sequel, Disney. There you go.
Isn't that the crazy thing, though? I always think that when you said that, like, so you and I have just spent, like, 45 to 50 minutes, like, just kind of being like, I don't know, whatever, like, struggling to think of things to talk about. But then I have the same answer to you, where you say, like, we're both like, it's not that great, like, whatever, it's got a very small target audience, it's fine if people don't watch it. And then you ask me, would you watch a second V.I. Warshawski? And I instantly go, like, yeah, I would, actually.
Yeah.
If they had made another one, I think I would actually check it out, because I think just enough here works, and Kathleen Turner is just good enough as the character. And even to like what you said, this again comes back to me being more forgiving of it, I think, because of enjoying the genre.
Sure.
You say the kid would have been a problem. I picture a second movie starting where you cut to like, because her apartment burns down in this movie as well.
Right.
You start a second movie and you cut to like her new apartment, which is also her like new place of business, and you see the kid is like working as her secretary now, right? Like that's where, and I think you can like lean into some of those old tropes again, where like the kid can be like her runner now. Even Sherlock Holmes had Baker Street irregulars, like the little kids who worked for him, ran all around town and got information for him, and I could see Kat being like that for V.I. Warshawski. Or honestly, it's Hollywood. I could see the second movie starting and Kat's just completely forgotten about, right? Like,
yeah, that too.
Just doesn't come back. So, but yeah, I actually would have watched another one of these. Now, here's the thing. This is kind of sad. Let's say this movie had been a big hit. It's still likely that the franchise might not have continued on much longer with Kathleen Turner. I assume you know what I'm alluding to here?
I do not. No.
Okay, so So we talked about how Kathleen Turner dominated the 80s, and we talked about how like this is 91, and this is kind of like one of her last really significant roles. I think kind of you would probably most people would point to Serial Mom, the John Waters film in 94, as being her last like really big high profile thing, although even that wasn't like a huge hit, but it's like most John Waters movies, it has a big cult following now. But Chris, I don't know if you saw in doing any research, it sounds like you didn't, but unfortunately in 1992, Kathleen Turner was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, like really bad rheumatoid arthritis.
Oh.
And while she was making Serial Mom, she started experiencing inexplicable pains and fevers. And by the time she was diagnosed, she could barely move. And actually, the doctor at the time told her she's going to end up in a wheelchair. She did not agree with that. She really fought it. But this is typical Hollywood unfortunate stuff. As she fought it, she kind of didn't feel like being very public with her diagnosis, because she felt like, I just want to fight this battle, and kind of get through it. But her appearance started to change. She put on some weight. She started to look a little differently. And as she said, I'm going to read a quote to you from her. I believe this comes from her biography. She says, "The press were merciless. They snipped that I had become fat and unrecognizable because I was an angry, washed-up diva, and out-of-control has-been, when in truth the changes in my physical appearance were caused by drugs and chemotherapy and were not within my control. Still, I did not reveal what was happening to me." And I've read other articles or other interviews with her where she talked about how that was really frustrating to her, because she still wanted to work during all this, but obviously the roles started drying up. People weren't offering her as much, and she's even said, I've seen, I believe also in her biography, she talks about how Robert Downey Jr. was like arrested all these times for drugs, and he still kept on getting work, but I wasn't being offered like anything because suddenly I didn't look like the Kathleen Turner they wanted, and they just assumed I must be a drunk or something else must be going on because of the changes her body went through. So that's really unfortunate. The good news is it does seem like she's really kind of recovered quite well from the rheumatoid arthritis and everything. It seems like she is in remission.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, obviously her career never quite recovered. She's gone on to, as you said, has popped up on Friends. She's kept working, but I think VR Warshawski and Serial Mom really do represent the end of that like dominant period of hers. So she got like a good decade, and then unfortunately I think it's health problems more than anything that took her out.
That's unfortunate. I have never known that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sucks. I definitely was aware of, through the grapevine of people that knew who Kathleen Turner was and what she's become, and it definitely came off a little, mean. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that definitely throws it all into new light. So that's unfortunate. That sucks. I don't like hearing that.
Yeah, and she is one of those people too who does have, I definitely was always very aware of her reputation as being someone who's very tough to work with, but I think we've seen enough in the last few years to realize that very often when you hear that an actress is tough to work with, as you said, that's just because the actress actually put their foot down about something.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not offered the same kind of forgiveness in that world that men are. So, yeah, I don't know. I didn't want to turn this into a big bummer at the end when we were finally just starting to say some nice things about.
Yeah, what a great job, Trev. You couldn't have front loaded this.
All right, let me bring it back around. Actually, let me one last thing to try to get us back on track here. Sure. Do you agree with me that the last 10 minutes or so are actually kind of exciting? Like when not to get into too spoiler territory, but she kind of handles the first villain, the very obvious villain, and then there's an additional element that suddenly pops up, and Kat is in danger, and she has to And I did read this comes from that article again, where the original script at this point I think had like Murray saving the day, and Kathleen Turner was no, VI is going to save the day. But I think that whole sequence is actually pretty well done. There's a shocking moment of violence that actually worked for me. I really do like the end of this movie.
No, I agree. The ending is very, very good, and I think it's because it gets serious again, right? It gives me that hard-boiled film noir feel, and there was some shocking violence. Again, no spoilers, just in case somebody wants to go see the movie. It's good. The last 10 minutes is very good, and again, the movie is a short sit, so it's
I don't know. I hope we don't sound too negative on it, because I would say if you ever if you're ever sitting there and it comes on TV, watch it. Actually, it's short. If you can get through some of the bad comedy, you're going to get to a pretty exciting third act. I'm going to give this ultimately I'm going to come down on this feeling like it's a slight recommend for me, even though I don't think it's it's certainly not one of the top movies we've done. This isn't passing the dread test or anything.
No.
But this is all, we always say, it's not a movie worth being mad about. It's not a movie worth hating. It is what it is.
It's better than Son of the Pink Panther. That's for fucking damn sure.
That is, you know what? That's, yes, 100%.
Well, that'll do it for this episode. Actually, the end of our Summer Surprise Part 2. We watched Men in Black International from 2019, Son of the Pink Panther from 1993, The Darkest Minds from 2018, and now V.I. Warshawski from 1991. So that was great. We love our Summer Surprise because sometimes it is truly a surprise. We do it on the air, which is fun.
And Chris, I actually think, I just want to quickly say, I think
sure.
I brought this up to you before. I know you're trying to segue. I want to give you a segue here. I actually think it worked out quite well that V.I. Warshawski ended up being the last movie in Summer Surprise, because we just talked about it's a 1991 movie, but to me, it feels very much like, it feels like a transition point, right?
Definitely.
It's the transition of like late 80s into the 90s. So actually, that's actually a really nice segue into our next big event, which I believe is going to be very, very exciting for our listeners.
Yes. Now, Trev, would you agree that majority of the episodes that we have done and the movies that we've watched were made in the 2000s and beyond?
Yes, definitely. That's certainly when Hollywood got more franchise crazy than ever. Yes.
Yes, and done and franchise crazy, but poorly.
Yes.
like very, very poorly. Saving things for later. We'll get to that later. You know, that's been the 2000s mantra for franchise filmmaking. But you know what's crazy? I think going into it might be actually episode 50 is going to be the start of our new theme months, listeners. We're actually falling back to the 80s. For the first time ever, we're going to be looking at actually 80s movies. And this event is spanning for, all the end of summer, but mostly through the fall. August to October. So let me list these out for you. Flash Gordon from 1980. The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension from 1984. Then we got a little bit of a success to series going on, where we're going to talk about how much we love the Rocky and Creed films.
Yep.
A little change of pace. Then we're looking at Streets of Fire from 1984. Then Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins from 1985. Then Masters of the Universe, 1987. And then capping off with Shocker from 1989. Yeah. So this is quite the list we got going on. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I mean, obviously, like I said, this is my. I grew up during the 80s. Yeah. I'm very aware of pretty much all those movies. I know for you, I believe it's not quite the case.
No.
I'm very excited to hear what you think of some of these, but yeah, I mean, the 80s. If nothing else, the 80s is a very interesting decade in cinema because it just seemed like a time when studios let people do whatever they wanted. And I think when we watch things like Streets of Fire and Buckaroo Banzai, we'll have a pretty strong sense of that. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about these.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to discussing 80s franchise filmmaking versus the 2000s and beyond. You know, now that we're so inundated with Marvel and Star Wars and Disney and superheroes and whatnot, it's going to be very interesting to see how Remo Williams wanted to make tons of sequels. So I have no idea. I really have nothing to. I have no idea what to expect. Like you said, I'm a child of the 90s. Trev's a child of the 80s. So this is going to be very, very interesting to have two different perspectives for here.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be a good time. I'm glad we're spending so much time in the 80s world, and with such a. Also, the other awesome thing about that is the variety of kinds of movies in there too, right? Like that's such a nice mixture of movies. Like obviously it's kind of sci-fi heavy, but still none of those movies are like the others. So this should be pretty fun.
Totally. So follow along at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. That's on all the socials. Like us there, like us everywhere. Also, rate, review, whatever you do. Give us a star rating. Hopefully you enjoyed this conversation. It was a little slow going, little meandering at times, but I think it was. I found it enjoyable personally. So
yeah. Should we just give them a peek behind the curtain, Chris, and also tell them that it was also one of the most difficult episodes we ever had to record?
Oh yes, and I'm most likely going to put a warning at the front to say that I had to save this and Frankenstein monster this due to network issues. So more mumble mouth from me by circumstance.
So So thanks, V.I. Warshawski.
The hardest title to say. Anyway. And then just join the tribe, hit that subscribe, and you'll follow along with us down our path. Fall back to the 80s. Sara Paretsky, one of the first writers to tackle this new subgenre of hard-boiled fiction, is considered one of the best, if not the best writer of the new wave of human. The best writer of the new wave of Oh my god.
You know what? I'm glad that you think women are human. This is a good thing.
Yeah, good. The best writer of the new wave of women writers writing about women as private eyes. She is certainly one of the most articulate. I can't speak today, Trev.
I'm with you, man. Go for it.
Holy fuck.
You have my support.
It's funny that I'm screwing up on the word articulately. That's not that irony is not lost on me right now. She is certainly one of the most articulately. I can't say that word. Articulately.